Stafræn umbreyting og sjálfbærni eru stærstu áskoranirnar sem að íslenskt atvinnulíf stendur frammi fyrir. Það samróma álit sérfræðinga að nýting stafrænnar tækni og sú hæfni sem þarf til að nýta hana séu lykillinn að verðmætasköpun og fjölgun starfa. Það einnig álit helstu sérfræðinga í heimi að í stafrænni umbreytingu felist lykillinn að endurreist efnahagskerfa heimsins í kjölfar COVID-kreppunnar. Stafræn tækni jafnframt grunnurinn að lausnum á svo mörgum stórum áskorunum sem við stöndum frammi fyrir, svo sem í umhverfismálum, heilbrigðismálum, sókn á alþjóðamarkaði og nýsköpun verður vart fugl né fiskur án stafrænnar hæfni. Allt bendir þó til þess að íslenskt atvinnulíf séu eftirbátar samanburðarlandana þegar kemur að stafrænni umbreytingu. Og það þrátt fyrir náin tengsl við Norðurlöndin sem að undantekningarlaust raða sér í topp 10 sætin á alþjóðlegan mælikvarða. Þórdís hefur á síðustu árum lagt mikla áherslu á að styðja íslensk fyrirtæki í þessari stóru umbreytingu og hefur meðal annars ásamt VR og Háskólanum í Reykjavík nálgast stjórnvöld varðandi samstarf í þeim efnum. Ekki eingöngu til stuðnings fyrirtækjunum, heldur einnig til þess að efla hæfni fólks á vinnumarkaði. Í því sambandi hafa samtökin fagnað mjög nýtilkominni klasastefnu stjórnvalda, enda klasahugmyndafræðin mjög góður grunnur til þess að skapa öflugan vettvang til samstarfs til þess að mæta stórum samfélagslegum áskorunum sem þessum. Í þessum þætti ætlum við að ræða mikilvægi þess að við sem samfélag tökum markvisst á þessum málum, en ekki síst að fá innsýn í það hvað liggur að baki árangri frændþjóð okkar þegar kemur að stafrænni umbreytingu, með það fyrir augum að læra af þeim og bæta stöðu Íslands. Ég ræddi við Jón Ólaf Halldórsson, formann SVþ, Katrínu Jakobsdóttir, forsætisráðherra, og Þórdísi Kolbrúnu Reykfjörd Gylfadóttir, ráðherra ferðamála, iðnaðar og nýsköpunar. Sæl Katrín, takk fyrir komuna.
Sæl.
Mér langar að byrja því að spyrja þig í aðgerðaráætlun 4. iðnbyltinguna. Þar segir meðal annars að mikilvægt sé að forystufólk í atvinnulífinu sé vel upplýst hvað felst í tæknibreytingum hennar svo að þau geti tekið þátt í að innleiða hana og það sé eitt markmið stjórnvalda að undirbúa atvinnulífið til að nýta þau tækifæri sem felast í henni. Hvers vegna skiptir þetta máli?
Já, þetta skiptir auðvitað öllu máli að við öll, bæði atvinnulífið og samfélagið og við einstaklingarnir séum í raun og veru tilbúin til að taka stjórnina í þessum málum. Að við séum ekki bara í raun og veru þjónar tækninar heldur að við tökum stjórnina á tækninni og nýtum hana í okkar þágu. Sko þegar er það svona stórt mál, mér finnst að sumuleyti tæknibreytingarnar dálítið eins og loftslagsváin. Það sem ég hef sagt, við náum engum árangri nema við séum öll í því saman og það er alveg eins með þessa stafrænu byltingu og við sjáum það að þetta einstök fyrirtæki til að mynda eru að grípa þessi tækifæri og nýta þau gríðarlega vel en það skiptir máli einhvern veginn að við séum öll hluti af þessari hreyfingu til þess að gera nákvæmlega eins og ég sagði hérna áðan að við tökum dálítið stjórnina. Hvað geta stjórnvöld gert? Þau geta auðvitað gert ýmislegt í gagnvart almenningi en líka tryggt það einhvern veginn að stjórnvöld, atvinnulíf og almenningur að við séum alltaf á sömu blaðsíðu þegar kemur að nýtingu tækninnar. Og ég segi, sko, fyrir stjórnmálamannesku þá hefur líf mitt tekið stakkaskiptum vegna tækninnar. Þegar ég byrjaði á þingi 2007 þá var ekki einu svona neitt Facebook. En nú fer stjórnmálaumræðan nánast öll fram á Facebook.
Hvert er þá hlutverk stjórnvalda þegar kemur að því að styðja atvinnulífið í stafrænni umbreytingu?
Já, í fyrsta lagi er það að eiga þetta samtal stefnumótun og horfa á þá staðreynd sem við sjáum í aðgerðaáætluninni að störf er að fara að breytast, störf er að fara að taka miklum breytingum, jafnvel hverfa og við þurfum að tryggja það að fólk geti bæði tileinkað sér nýja þekkingu, nýja tækni og í raun og veru tekist á við ný verkefni sem tæknibyltingin færir okkur. Stjórnvöld eiga auðvitað að vera í farabróti þarna að standa fyrir því að allir geti leitað sér nýra þekkingar, þroskað hæfileika sína. Við erum núna að fara af stað með námskeið, hvað varðar einmitt tækni og gervigreind sem við ætlum bara að hafa aðgengilegt fyrir alla. Þannig að við þurfum að eiga þetta samtal stefnumótun, við þurfum að tryggja upplýsingu, menntun, fræðslu fyrir okkur öll. Tryggja við séum öll þáttakendur í tæknibyltingunni og ekki bara áhorfendur Og síðan eru það innviðirnir sem eru sterkir, en skiptir máli að stjórnvöld standa að. Og síðast en ekki síst, og kannski fjórða atriði, það er þetta síðan hvernig getum við nýtt tækifærin sem felast bæði fyrir atvinnulífið en líka fyrir stjórnvöld í nýrri tækni til aukinnar hagræðingar, breyttra atvinnuhátta, árangurs í loftslagsmálum.
Hvað hyggjast stjórnvöld gera til að styðja íslenskt atvinnulíf í stafrænni umbreytingu?
Það sem við hyggjumst gera fyrir utan þetta sem tengist menntun og upplýsingu, það í raun og veru svona virkara samtal í gegnum og þar raun og veru styðjast við nýja klasastefnu, virkara samtal það hvernig stjórnvöld og atvinnulíf geta í raun og veru saman nýtt sér þessi tækifæri. Og ég held að það sé í því felist ávinningur fyrir alla aðila, bæði bara fólki í landinu, þá sem að reka fyrirtæki og þau, og svo auðvitað stjórnvöld, að við séum einhvern veginn öll að tileinka okkur þessi tækifæri sem felast í tæknibyltingunni. Því þetta snýst auðvitað ekki bara að það er auðvitað stórmál þessar breytingar sem eru að verða á störfum, en það er auðvitað stórmál fyrir stjórnvöld einmitt að fólk tileinki sér nýja þekkingu og tilverða nýstörf. Og það er kannski hinn mikli ávinningur fyrir bæði samfélagið og atvinnulífið.
Ég finnst í raun bara blasa við að þessar breytingar sem eiga sér stað, að þær verða ekki, við mætum þeim ekki einhvern veginn hvert í sínu horni og það dugir ekki að stjórnvöld séu með augun á þeim boltum, það dugir ekki að atvinnulífið sé það bara eða einstaka fyrirtæki eða þau sem kenna einhver fræði í slíku, heldur snýst þetta þetta samstarf. Og við vitum líka að fyrirtæki eru þetta af öllum stærðum og gerðum og uppistaða fyrirtæki hér eru náttúrulega lítil og meðalstór fyrirtæki. Þannig að við þurfum að taka höndum saman og vinna þetta saman af því við munum ekki hlaupa nógu hratt ef að hvert og eitt fyrirtæki á að leysa þetta fyrir sig og við getum ekki gert þetta einhvern veginn án samstarfs við atvinnulífið. Þannig að atvinnulífið þarf svolítið að í raun kannski leiða vagnin en við þurfum auðvitað að vera saman bara einhvern veginn í þessu verkefni og stjórnvöld þurfa svo einhvern veginn að átta sig á bara og líta til annarra landa auðvitað líka hvað er að gerast þar. Þannig að við bara draugumst ekki aftur úr því þetta er svona alda sem að einhvern veginn er að koma og við getum annarkvort flotið á henni og með henni eða við lendum undir og til þess að það gerist ekki hið síðara þá þurfum við að vinna það saman. Við þurfum að, eins og ég sagði áðan, bera okkur saman við löndin í kringum okkur og vera vissum að við séum ekki einhvern veginn að dragast aftur úr heldur á svona fremst meðal jafningja í því og svo styðja bara við til að mynda þetta snýst í raun að mörgu leyti svona þetta klasa samstarf og við höfum þar svona ákveðnu hlutverki að gegna bæði sem bara beinn þáttakandi vegna þess að svona þessir mikilvægu klasar eru oft í einhvers konar samstarfi við stjórnvöld og svo líka held ég bara að vera tilbúin að hreyfa okkur hratt þannig að við séum í góðu samtali og við séum þá líka tilbúin að bregðast við þegar leitað er til okkar og við finnum það, núna er það gert og þá finnst mér skipta máli að við sýnum vilja í verki og sýnum að við erum saman í þessu vegna þess að ef við erum ekki saman í þessu þá munir þetta bara ganga ver og við vitum að í þessum breytingum þá náttúrulega hefur það bein áhrif á margt fólk og mikla breytingar á skömmum tíma eru bara í grunninn óþægilegar fyrir manneskjur, það er bara einhvern veginn þannig að við þurfum líka að sýna að við skiljum það og við viljum gera það sem við getum til þess að þetta gangi sem best fyrir alla. Þannig að við séum ekki með einhverja hópa sem verða einhvern veginn verða eftir, heldur þurfum við að líta á þetta sem tækifæri til þess að fjárfesta í fólki, fjárfesta í hæfni og getu hvers og eins og við séum einhvern veginn sýnum það að þetta er sameiginlegt verkefni og þessar breytingar koma, þannig hvað ætlum við að gera til þess að við svona sem samfélagi njótum góðs af því og tryggjum samkeppnishæfni atvinnulífsins sem auðvitað líka skiptir máli fyrir starfsfólki. En við höfum á hverjum tíma mikið samstarf með öllum bara hagaðilum hverju sinni og nú er þetta stóra verkefnið hjá stórum hluta atvinnulífsins og þá er þetta bara spurning hvernig getum við hjálpa til og hver er svona okkar sýn og hvernig fer það saman og mér sýnist í þessu sem betur fer við svona svolítið hafa sameiginlega sýn og mér finnst við líka vera svona alveg meðvituð að það er ekkert sjálfgefið að þetta gerist, það er ekkert sjálfgefið að þetta verði auðvelt fyrir alla og því leytinu til er þetta líka sameiginlegt verkefni til þess að fólk finni það að við áttum okkur á því en við vitum líka að þessi breyting verður og ef við tökum ekki þátt í henni þá verðum við bara eftir á.
Hvað hyggjast stjórnvöld gera til að styðja íslenskt atvinnulíf í stafrænni umbreytingu?
Við höfum verið að vinna klasastefnu sem að núna er komin fyrir þingið og þar svona með þess að sýn bara hversu mikilvægt verkfæri og bara gott verkfæri klasasamstarf og það í raun öflugt verkfæri til þess að leysa hinn ýmsu verkefni og ýmsu áskoranir. En þegar þú færð saman stjórnvöld, atvinnulíf, háskólasamfélag og svo frumkvöðla og fjárfesta þá þetta bara líklega öflugasta svona samstarf og blanda sem við getum búið til þess að sækja fram og svo stefna liggur þá núna fyrir. Við erum síðan bara tilbúin í samstarf gagnvart bara svona ákveðnum hópum eins og við erum að vinna núna með samtökum verslunar og þjónustu og VFR og mér finnst mjög jákvætt að sjá þegar að eins og VFR og samtökin í einhvern veginn atvinnulífinu eru svona stilla saman strengi og segja þetta sameiginlegt verkefni og þá finnst mér í raun að minnsta sem stjórnvöld geta gert einhvern veginn að taka þátt í því og styðja við það eins og við getum. Við einhvern veginn erum búin að átta okkur á því þannig að við þurfum að vera svona snögg til þess að bregðast við því og gera það sem gera þarf og við vitum að við erum ekki ein í því verkefni, önnur lönd eru farin af stað og aftur ef að við einhvern veginn hreyfum okkur ekki nægilega hratt að þá mun bara samkeppnishæfni fyrirtæki á Íslandi verða lakari, önnur lönd ná það bara bæði fram úr okkur og fyrirtækin hér tapa og þar með þá auðvitað starfsfólki líka og bara við. Þannig að ég held að við sjáum að löndin kringum okkur eru að hlaupa sér hratt og hafa þegar sett þetta á dagskrá. Þannig að við þurfum að vera mjög meðvituð það að dragast ekki aftur úr, hvorki á þessu sviði né öðrum. Þessi áhersla okkar á nýsköpun bara á öllum sviðum felur auðvitað í sér að hvert og eitt okkar þarf að búa yfir nægilega mikilli hæfni þegar kemur þessi stafrænu byltingu til þess að geta tekið fullan þátt og ef hún ekki til staðar einhvern veginn inn í nýsköpunina almennt að þá munum við ekki geta í raun náð eins langt og við ella gætum. Stafræn hæfni og nýsköpun þú tekur þetta ekki sundur og þetta fer mjög víða í margar atvinnugreinar þannig að geta okkar og bara mikilvægt þess að við tryggjum þessa stafrænu hæfni bara mjög mikil.
SÁ hefur lagt gríðarlega mikla áherslu á stafræna umbreytingu síðastliðin ár. Af hverju skiptir þetta svona miklu máli fyrir íslensk fyrirtæki?
Ég tel að þessi óhætt að fullyrða það að stafræn umbreyting sé ein mesta áskorun sem íslenskt atvinnulíf og þar með íslenskt samfélag standi frammi fyrir þessar mundir. Stafræn þróun ásamt þróun til aukinnar sjálfbærni sennilega það mikilvægasta sem við erum að horfast í augu við akkúrat núna. Stafræn þróun hún getur leitt af sér svo margar hluti, til dæmis aukna framleiðni, ný störf, aukin lífsgæði og svona mætti lengi telja og þess vegna svo mikilvægt að íslenskt samfélag og innviðir þess standi saman til þess að marka skýra leið með verkefnum sem munu styðja til þess að við fáum þann nauðsynlega hagvaxtarauka sem við teljum að við þurfum og það mun þá auka samkeppnishæfni þjóðarinnar til lengri tíma. Þessi áskorun sem við stöndum frammi fyrir, hún það stór og það ekki hægt að einangrana við eitthvað eitt ákveðið verkefni í samfélaginu. Það mjög mikilvægt að atvinnulífið, stjórnvöld, vinnumarkaðurinn í heild sinni skulum við segja, menntakerfið, við þurfum að standa saman að því að byggja hér upp sterka innviði til þess einmitt að auka samkeppnishæfnina. Við vitum að það stórt verkefni sem þarf að vinna. Við þurfum að efla færni og getu fyrirtækja, starfsfólks til þess að takast á við þessa miklu áskorun sem felst í þeim breytingum sem stafræn umbreyting mun hafa áhrif á öll störf í samfélaginu hér á næstu árum.
Það fullt af sameiginlegum snertiflutum, en hvað varðar stafrænu umbreytinguna innan fyrirtækjanna sjálfra? Það ekki bara eitthvað sem að fyrirtækin geta sjálf séð um?
73% af störfum á innanlandsmarkaði kemur frá litlum og meðalstórum fyrirtækjum. Þessi fyrirtæki eru ekki jafnvel í stakk búin til þess að takast á við þær hindranir sem felast í stafrænni umbreytingu. Þess vegna þurfum við á skýrri stefnu líka stjórnvalda til þess að hjálpa okkur varða veginn til framtíðar því að þetta snýst samkeppnishæfni þjóðarinnar. Í könnunum höfum við séð að það bil helmingur allara starfa í Evrópu með einhverjum hætti mun auka notkun og stafrænni tækni í sínu störfum í framtíðinni. En svo raunveruleiki sá að yfirgnæfandi meirihluti Evrópubúa á aldrinum 16 til 74 ára, hann ræður ekki við þeirri færni í dag sem hann þarf að nota eftir 5 ár í sínu störfum. Þannig verkefnið mjög brýnt og alvarlegt og það ekki seinna vænna en að fara af stað.
En veistu, hvernig stöndum við miðað við aðrar þjóðir þegar kemur að stafrænni umbreytingu?
Í nýlegum rannsóknum þá höfum við séð að við stöndum ekki nægilega vel. Í rannsóknum innan OECD og í virtum háskólum sem hafa skoðað þessu mál og þá snýst rannsóknin samkeppnishæfni þjóða á sviðum stafrænna tækni. Þá kemur í ljós að á 63 þjóða lista þá erum við í 23. sæti sem ekki góður árangur og sérstaklega við lítum til þess að þau lönd sem við helst berum okkur saman við sem Skandinavía þá eru nágrannar og frændur okkar, þeir raða sér í öll 10 efstu sætin. Þannig að það verk að vinna hjá okkur og þessi frændur okkar, þeir hafa nú sem betur fer rétt okkur hjálparhönd í þessu og eru tilbúin að aðstoða okkur við að ná betri árangri. Veruleiki íslenskra fyrirtækja og samfélagsins sá að heimurinn hefur minnkað og hann kominn heim í stofu. Stafræn umbreyting hefur fært erlendu fyrirtækjum færi á því að vera með viðskipti hér á Íslandi á nokkura fyrirhafnar. Þess vegna svo mikilvægt að við eflum þessa færni hjá íslenskum fyrirtækjum og starfsfólki til þess að takast á við þessa samkeppni sem þarna á ferðinni. Og það gerist með því að stjórnvöld og við í atvinnulífinu og á vinnumarkaði að við tökum höndum saman og mörkum mjög skýra stefnu hvernig við ætlum að takast á við þessa miklu alþjóðlegu samkeppni sem komin til að vera hér í íslensku raunveruleika. Við sjáum að stjórnvöld víðast hvar annar staðar, sérstaklega í Skandinavíu og þessum við erum að horfa mest til, þau koma með mjög afgerandi hætti að þessum verkefnum. Þau leggja til fjármagn sem skiptir náttúrulega miklu máli og þau hvetja til þess að fyrirtækin þjappi sér saman, myndi sér einhverja skýra stefnu ásamt stjórnvöldum, einmitt í þessum stafræna heimi sem komin og mikil áskorun fyrir okkur hér og nú. Það mikilvægt að við drögumst ekki aftur úr í þessari samkeppni. Því við þurfum að auka framleiðni, við þurfum að auka samkeppnishæfni þjóðarinnar til þess að takast á við þennan stóra veruleika sem komin, sem erlend samkeppni og stórfyrirtæki sem að keppa við íslensk fyrirtæki á nánast öllum mörkuðum sem við vinnum á. Ég held að við höfum séð á þessu eina ári eitthvað gerast sem hefði kannski tekið 3-4 ár, hefðu við ekki lent í þeirri stöðu sem við lendum í. Við getum tekist á við áskoranir út allan heim, við höfum einhverstu lært það. Og það ætti að sýna okkur það að hvaða tækifæri eru í raun og veru í stafrænni umbreytingu. Þannig að þetta ekkert spurning það að sitja hjá og horfa á heiminn halda áfram, við verðum að taka þátt í þessu. Heimurinn í raun að minnka leið og hann stækkar. Með stafrænni umbreyting og svo tækni sem henni fylgir, gefur okkur sama kost á því að tala við heiminn eins og heimurinn og tala við okkur.
Norðurlöndin raða sér undantekningarlaust í topp 10 sætin í öllum alþjóðlegum samanburði þegar kemur að stafrænni umbreytingu. Bæði Svíþjóð og Danmörk lýsa því einfaldlega yfir í stafrænum stefnum sínum að þau ætli að verða best í heimi þegar kemur að stafrænni tækni. Við ræddum við aðila frá hverju og einu hinna Norðurlandana með það fyrir augum að skilja hvað liggur að baki þessum árangri og hvað við hér á Íslandi getum lært af frændþjóðum okkar. Jan Damsgaard prófessor við stafrænu deildina í Kaupmannahafnarháskóla. Hann meðlimur í Disruption-ráðinu sem sett var upp af síðustu ríkisstjórn í Danmörku og nú, eins og hann orðar það, í dvala. Hann jafnframt stjórnarmaður í SMV Digital sem verkefni á vegum danskra stjórnvalda þar sem stutt við stafræna umbreytingu lítilla og meðalstóra fyrirtækja. Why do you think Denmark is in the lead of digital transformation?
I think there are several reasons why Denmark is in the lead in the digital transformation of the society and the economy. First of all, I'd like to point to the established Disruption Council. It was established in 2017, where the Prime Minister took the initiative to sit down and form a council that should address the digital transformation of society and the economy, as well as globalization. No less than 7 cabinet ministers. So it was huge in that sense from the government's point of view. He also invited leading CEOs of Danish companies. So we had the CEO of Lego, we had the CEO of Maersk, we had the CEO of the Danish teleoperator, we had the CEO of Microsoft in Denmark, and this was at the CEO level, not sending any replacement or somebody else, right? So, and then we had the director of the Danish Confederation of Danish Industries, and we had the director of the Danish Chamber of Commerce. Our Prime Minister also invited the trade unions. And that was, for instance, the union leader of the salaried workers, the union leader of the metal workers, the union leader of the office workers, and so forth. So there was a very strong representation of both employers and employees and the institutions as well as government in this council. And then, yes, there were two academics as well. So there's a professor in macroeconomics, and there was me coming from the digital side. And what we put upon ourselves was to land digitalization into Denmark, and not to preserve and not to kind of shield Denmark from the wrath of digitalization, but actually to land it in a way that will transform the Danish labor market and transform the Danish labor system. We did that engaging in a number of meetings. These were large meetings. We traveled to many different areas of Denmark to get the local flavor of what was going on, also into the Disruption Council.
So to you, what is digital transformation?
To me, digitalization is a paradigm shift. We're talking about doing something completely different. So many of these things are brand new. Nevertheless, they are pretty disrupting, you could say. So they will change many of the well-established business models that have been established over the past 100 and 150 years. All of a sudden, there's a new way of doing things. So there's both an information campaign in teaching the businesses about these new opportunities and this disruption that's coming, but also assisting them in taking that leap, and I could almost say a leap of faith into the new world, because it will disrupt, it will destroy, in many times it will undermine existing business models. And during that transition, you are kind of in a situation where you're not profitable the same way you were earlier. You are not seeing the future as something that can be predicted. You are a little bit in a jeopardy where you must find ways in which you can learn from others and finding how can you transform your business into a new digital economy. And that is so important that the government will step in and help companies learn that. The alternative is not to prevent digitalization from coming in, right? Because then the mark of it will be much harder and it will be much more difficult for the companies to survive that situation. But it's to nurture the existing businesses so that they can take this transformation to them. I think that the society would, if we only relied on the market mechanisms, it would be a lot harder than it necessarily have to be. If you notice, then a lot of the digital economy is actually passing outside of Europe. The large internet giants that are global, so many of the unicorns, the Facebook, the Amazon, the LinkedIn, and so forth and so on, they are American companies. And then some of them are Chinese. And Europeans are saying we don't want the American ones because they are too capitalistic, and we don't want the Chinese ones because they are too much into surveillance society and so forth. But my answer is you cannot just dismiss those two alternatives. You actually have to come up with a constructive way of building European values into equivalent platforms that can compete on a global market. If we want to force our own future and have a choice in how we want to build the future, we should be able to take this digitalization to us and build our own future with these technologies. Some that will support North European values the way I see it, because right now we do not really have that. We have a lot of American, we have a lot of Chinese companies, but we want European ones as well. So in Denmark, what we have done is to address especially the small and medium-sized enterprises, because they seem to be especially at jeopardy when these things are happening. They don't have deep pockets so that they can support and finance a radical transition of their business models. So what we have done is something in an initiative called SME Digital, where we have a pocket of money where we will provide third-party independent aid to small and medium-sized enterprises along certain topics. So it could be e-commerce, it could be ERP systems, it could be IoT, it could be blockchain, it could be any of these themes. And then what the companies do is they apply, and then they get a voucher for 3,000 euro or 15,000 euro, where they can choose between these independent consultants who can come and help them understand what is this technology, what's up and down, because if you just call the nearest consultancy company, they will just charge you a lot of money and sell you whatever you want. What we also do for part of it is that if you get one of the small vouchers, you're also obliged to participate in a conference where people like myself will come and give a presentation about these new technologies, and we form small groups out of the company so that they can learn from each other, and we actually expect them to give each other a phone call after they get the money to hear what's going on. But what really matters to these people is, to small businesses, is actually what their peers think. So we form these small groups where we try to get them to talk to each other, what they have done, and so forth and so on. And that's also extremely effective. In Denmark, we have had really high growth from the past many years. So the small and medium-sized enterprises have been so busy that they haven't had time to look at digitalization. But the COVID-19 has slowed down and created a pause, a reflection point where you could step back and maybe reflect upon, are we doing the right thing? So that's very positive. And I think that maybe just now is a good time to strike while the iron is hot, to do these things to get digitalization started. And the results of the SME digital has been very positive. I think it's more than 90% has been satisfied or very satisfied.
Our journey in systematically supporting businesses in their digital transformation is really just starting. Do you have any advice for us as we start this journey?
It's important that you get as many people and institutions on board as possible. And you see this as not a way to protect from digitalization, but to see it as a way in which you can land digitalization to the benefit of everyone in Iceland. And that's what we did in the Disruption Council. I'm very impressed with the unions that they said, you know, this is not a question about protecting us another 2 or 3 years from digitalization. No, this is a way in which we can land it. So, for instance, the chairman of the Danish metal workers, he said, your best co-worker is a robot, because he knew that the alternative to not working with robots would be the closing down of factories, the movement of jobs to Southeast Asia. If you work with a robot, that requires higher skills, will increase productivity, will get more income, and will also give the worker a higher salary. So let all the boring stuff be handled by the robot, so that the metal worker can concentrate on the difficult stuff. So I think that was very forward-looking. One thing I like to give as an advice as well is to travel around Iceland when you do this. What we did in the Disruption Council was we usually started at noon at the meeting, but in the morning we would go with the ministers and visit local companies in the area. And that way, many of the places we felt, the smaller towns in Denmark, felt that digitalization is not just something that would happen in Copenhagen or in Reykjavik or in London or in Silicon Valley, but that was something that would reach out and also change the world where they live. Then I think get both the unions and the businesses, leading businesses, and also the trade unions to collaborate on these issues. That's another important thing. And then try to get this feeling that this is something that is given. We must find solutions. Digitalization doesn't go away. It will just strike us harder if we keep postponing the inevitable. It's not something we can leave to the Chinese and the Americans. And now with the UK out of the EU, then the more we actually need to come together as European countries to find alternatives. That's also why I like that Margrethe Vestager, the Danish EU Commissioner, is working very hard on these things, and they're actually coming out with new regulation in EU called the Digital Market Act and the Digital Service Act. Part of the Disruptions Council work was also kind of adult re-education of people, the people that were in the Disruption Council. So the Prime Minister, he didn't know much about blockchain technology, but I was allocated half an hour to have the whole Disruption Council learn about technologies and disrupt digital technologies and blockchain and IoT and these kind of things, right? So in that sense, both the cabinet ministers, but also, you know, the union leaders, we built up this sense of trust, so we could sit down and then they would go, you union leaders, with blockchain, is that something that will put our members' position in the companies in jeopardy, or what is it, what's up and down in this technology, right? So that worked really well. We have to support the genesis and the development of these technologies that embed European moral and ethical values, in my opinion.
Lena Karlsson ber titilinn Deputy Director General í innviðaráðuneyti Svía og fer fyrir stafrænum stefnumálum sænsku ríkisstjórnarinnar. The Nordics are consistently in the top 10 of international indices for digital transformation. Now, why do you think that is, and what is it that puts Sweden in such a global leadership position in digitalization?
I think there are a number of things that really are relevant to all of the Nordics. We're fairly small economies, so we rely on trade. We need to be curious, we need to be outward looking, we need to be innovative. So I think that's something that really ties us together, and it is one reason why we're high up in rankings. I think in Sweden in particular, we had some early reforms, both in terms of deploying fiber broadband throughout the country. And we had an initiative which basically gave people a tax rebate to buy PCs to put in the homes. And these initiatives all happened in the late 1990s. And I think that really provided a good foundation to build on. But we also have a long collaboration between the public sector and business. And I think that's another aspect that's quite peculiar to Sweden, this close interaction between the public and private sector. And I think that has served us quite well.
Why is it important that the government take part in supporting the digital transformation of business?
Well, I think digitalization as such, it's something that will impact on all aspects of society. It'll impact on how we work, how we live, how we get about our day-to-day lives. So there's not any particular sector of society that will be immune to digitalization. And that, of course, means that all aspects of business will be impacted as well. And there are a number of great challenges that I think face our countries, such as climate change, aging populations, for instance. So I think, again, the collaboration between the public-private sector here is really important in terms of addressing those challenges.
But why should the government be supporting businesses with digital transformation? Isn't it something that the market should take care of itself?
What we know when we talk to small business in particular in Sweden is that it's very difficult to know what's right and appropriate for you, for your business. There's really a lack of skills and understanding. And I think this is where the public sector can play a role by making sure that smaller businesses get the skills needed so that they themselves can make informed decisions about their businesses, both in terms of perhaps systems to invest in or ways in which they can transform their business. So it really comes down to skills, in my view. Well, the government has done a number of different things. So I'm really going to highlight 4 initiatives that I think are interesting. First of all, the government initiated what they call innovation partnership programs. And these were started in 2019 to foster a culture of collaboration between high-level participants from the public sector, from industries, civil society and academia. These people should jointly identify and develop a set of common goals and priorities. So digital transformation is something that you'll see in all of these 4 innovation partnerships. But there's one partnership in particular that's specifically dedicated to digital transformation in business. And this partnership has set up a number of independent working groups that deal with specific obstacles faced by business. It comes to obstacles in terms of finding skills or developing skills, obstacles in terms of data, and also regulatory challenges for SMEs. So that's sort of a big initiative that's run centrally out of the government offices. But obviously there are a lot of other initiatives as well. The biggest obstacle to growth in small and medium-sized business in Sweden is access to skills. So the government has tasked the Agency for Economic and Regional Growth and the Higher Education Authority to work in collaboration to develop really a framework for identifying digital specialist skills, i.e. the high-end skills you need for the future in terms of AI, automation, etc. So the idea here is to be able to make projections on the types of skills that are needed and the number of people needed for the future, but also to engage in dialogue and provide advice on how you can improve and adapt training courses to increase the number of digital specialists. And given that digitalization is really picking up pace in all aspects of society, there is an increased need for specialists, but we don't have very good data on the types of specialists we need yet. So that's one initiative. The government has also launched a program to raise digital skills among board members and senior executives in very small businesses, so businesses with up to 49 employees. And the idea here is to provide skills and training so that the board members are able to see how digitalization can be used to develop their particular business, but also to understand and manage the risks associated with digitalization.
What results are you seeing from these initiatives?
Well, these initiatives all started up in 2019, 2020, so they're still in the implementation phase and it's a little bit too early to evaluate them. But we've seen a great deal of interest, particularly in the project around specialist high-end skills. And that's been a great deal of interest, both from business organizations and from universities.
What advice would you give us?
The advice I would have for anyone starting a journey into a more digitalized world would be to find a shared vision or a goal to work towards, create avenues for collaboration, because digitalization is a truly horizontal issue. It'll impact all aspects of society. So making sure that you have those avenues for collaboration. And I think also it's important to move beyond thinking of digitalization purely as a tool to increase efficiency or cut cost within a business. You need to look at how it can transform or completely change a sector or a business. And I think lastly, skills. Everyone will need to have an ability to participate in the digital evolution of society, both as private citizens, as businesses, and sort of as high-end professionals in the field. So focusing on skills, I think, will be really important going forward.
You mentioned the joint vision and that you formulated a very holistic digital strategy for Sweden. How important do you think this work has been for you?
I think it's important to have a shared vision and a strategy because it gives you something to strive towards. It's really good for gathering momentum, gathering energy, because there's so much that could potentially be done. You need a way of deciding what are the most important things, given our context, our state of development, where we are at the moment and where we're hoping to go. For us, it has been quite useful. I think it's very important to bring together actors from all parts of society because digitalization really impacts all parts of society. So providing an avenue for people to get together from academia, from business, from civil society is really important because it's the only way we can make sure that any particular concerns or issues are brought to the forefront. Well, it's going to happen, so you can try and decide if you want to be proactive or reactive. And I think that's really why it's important to get all parts of society involved. Trade unions are there next to the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, and you need that collaboration. You need everyone around the table.
Hanna Martinen Dikins Senior Director á sviði stafrænnar umbreytingar hjá Business Finland. What is Finland doing which puts you in such a global leadership position when it comes to digital transformation?
You know, there's things like availability of latest technologies, highest availability of scientists and engineers in the world, the most innovative country in the world, and if I may add, also the happiest country in the world. And why I took this happiest nation in this equation is because, to me at least, that really should be one of the outcomes of working on digitalization and digital transformation. The other area, of course, for us is education system. It's very comprehensive. We're looking into primary care, academia, but also something that I think in digital transformation is super important, and that's lifelong learning. So you can't leave anyone behind in understanding how to equip yourself and how to utilize digitalization. On the national level, we have sort of taken the road of holistic approach to digitalization. What does it really mean? It means national strategies, policies, and then finally the role of companies. Companies, both large and small, they have quite early on understood the importance of innovation and innovation-driven growth, both in terms of how can they utilize these different technologies, also like how can they maybe twist and turn their business models, and in that sense, for example, find new revenue sources.
Why is it important that the government take part in supporting the digital transformation of Finnish business?
I think in terms of digitalization and digital transformation, what are really the vital key elements that are required for sustainable transformation? And when I talk about sustainable, I really mean it in a wider concept. Digitalization's ability to renew business, to create more jobs, more environmental friendly solutions and services or ways of doing things, to have an inclusive digitalization. Don't leave anyone behind. Everyone in the society has to understand what it means and how to utilize it. So when you consider this wider, more holistic concept, you really understand that governments have a certain role to play. For example, in Finland, we are putting a lot of emphasis on making public policies and similar regulations and subsequent national strategies in the way that they would really support innovation-based environment that is fostering entrepreneurship, ecosystemic approach to creating and developing different digital services and solutions. Could this be then in reality? You could just consider, for example, open test sites or importance of access to data, for example, health data, which we are quite famous for here in Finland. Another area that governments play a very important role is innovation financing. Our approach has been very much focusing on the innovation-driven growth. So there, it's very important that we understand that not all companies may not always have the adequate resources to put a lot of efforts on research and development innovations. At the same time, it's very important because if you don't have that, you don't have the subsequent new businesses and services, yet alone the underlying technologies to utilize the digitalization. And then maybe the last role for government is leading by example. So really putting a full-hearted effort on digitalization, most or if not all government services. That then again links back to innovation-driven growth because new innovations are required also by the government. And it links back to companies because ultimately companies are the ones who support and provide the solutions and services. Manufacturing is interesting because many times people say, oh, but you know, if you bring in automation and digitalization and whatnot, that just means we're losing jobs. So we have 5 factories, all of whom are large, globally known companies. Some are Finnish, some are Nordic. They came to realize that all of them are having similar sort of issues with digitalization and digital transformation. And what was decided by the companies is that they want to do collaborative innovation on this, research and development with tangible results. And then they started to work with SMEs, large companies, and academia. All 5 factories worked simultaneously. Their factory floors were open for these research groups. And as someone somewhere figured out a problem, they immediately distributed that knowledge to all of the other 5 factories. So that's why they were able to accumulate understanding in order to then become more efficient, user-friendly, environmentally friendly, and of course more competitive. And at the end result of all of this, many of them have actually gone ahead and they have more people working in their factories.
There seems to be a great focus on public-private person partnerships and this ecosystemic approach. Why is this important and how do you facilitate that?
The ecosystemic approach is incredibly important. The digitalization should really be bringing us towards a sustainable growth. So it's very important that you also are able to look into different viewpoints from different people. And therefore, we are putting a lot of emphasis on this ecosystem and even a bit more, we call it public-private person partnership. So PPPP. The whole idea is that it's an inclusive growth for the society. I can train myself in AI, for example. There's a free online course for that, by the way, probably even in Icelandic now. You know, the company next door, they can equip themselves with better services and solutions, and governments can serve better their businesses in the country. It's this ecosystemic approach. It's at the core, be it in the company's development or sort of the government development or individual development. And this is what we're trying to foster by putting a lot of effort in innovation funding side, but also in drafting the national strategies that have to do with digitalization. For example, AI. Finland was the first country in the world to embark on the development of AI as a national strategy. And what we did there is a typical example how we try to approach these issues is that we actually had development groups working on the different elements within artificial intelligence, trying to really be able to take everyone into consideration. And all of this is public, so even if you're not directly involved in these working groups, for example, you can always find a way to contribute. And I think this is also something that should come quite natural for us Nordic countries. We are not too many people as such. So we should be able to have this kind of ecosystemic collaboration. It requires trust. The more I tell about myself to you, the more you will tell about yourself to me, and then the more together we can then create and collaborate.
So what has the Finnish government done specifically to support digitalization of Finnish business? Are there any specific initiatives in place?
The Finnish government, through its various modes of operandi, have supported the growth of businesses and businesses digitalization. One element is the innovation financing, the collaborative approach amongst the companies in order to enhance their capabilities even more, also in collaborating with academia. This we feel is very important because that equips the companies ultimately with the best possible resources and know-how and understanding as to how they can benefit from digitalization. The second is the opening up of pilot sites for the Finnish companies or companies based here in our innovation ecosystem to test their different services and solutions within that space. That's heavily linked to that is opening up the data. So the more you digitalize a society, the more it's data-driven society. Then, of course, how government is helping and supporting the companies' digitalization is in a way indirectly, but however, very importantly, and that is in safeguarding that the regulatory environment is clear, transparent, and safeguarding both the companies and the citizens. We have multiple elements in terms of, for example, coaching and training SMEs, for example, in utilizing different elements in digitalization. Just as an example, we were running a couple of years ago, actually together with our Swedish colleagues, a program where we were helping the retail sector to utilize e-commerce to its full extent. There's simple tools and methods that one can embark on in terms of workshops, seminars, and some sort of training sessions. Especially on the SME side that I just mentioned, it has been very eye-opening for many because the smaller the company, I think the more it's on the daily hand-to-mouth sort of operations. So in that regard, it's very important to kind of package the basic know-how and help the companies to know where they can get further information. What we found was even more important was, again, this ecosystemic approach. Have these kind of peer-to-peer sessions where they are training each other in different elements.
Our journey in systematically supporting businesses in their digital transformation is really just starting. Do you have any advice for us as we start this journey?
I would really say that work together in an ecosystemic manner, that is absolutely most crucial. Create national strategies, create them jointly in this public-private person partnership manner that I talked about earlier. Foster innovation-driven growth and entrepreneurial growth, obviously, in this same regard. If you feel like you have some layers of this equation or elements in the equation that you don't have in Iceland, opening up and work in collaboration with other like-minded nations. I very strongly believe that you have equally the same elements in Iceland that we have, for example, had here in Finland.
Would you elaborate for me on what you mean when you talk about a human-centric approach?
Human-centric approach is one of the most important elements in sustainable digitalization and digital transformation. In drafting policies from a government perspective, in looking into what to do with data, in considering what sort of support mechanisms one should have in place, keep the humans at the core. If you can't answer to the needs of the individuals and people in your society, you will fail eventually. Have ethical approach to data, the concept of lifelong learning as at the adamant core in your policies and ways forward. Engage students, engage elderly, engage academia, encourage private sector, small players, large players, in working together with the government in designing your strategies and the ways forward.
Paul Chaffee statssekretær í Communal- og Moderniseringsdepartementet í Noregi og helsti ráðgjafi ráðherra stafrænna mála þar í landi.
It's kind of a paradox that the Nordics seem to come on top of different global rankings, perhaps especially in the digital area, without having the big technology companies are world leading when it comes to using technology, both in businesses and as private citizens. It has to do with our history and our culture in a way. We tend to believe that we make the best decisions if we have the facts in place. If we lack information, we often agree on the process to gather more. And sometimes people criticize us because it can be a bit slow, but the advantage, I think, is that the trust level is high. So as long as we keep in a way developing innovative new digital solutions that are where we have sort of the basics in place when it comes to security, privacy, transparency, when it comes to telling people what's happening. So I think that's the way we should do it.
When it comes to digital transformation within business, why should we not just leave it to the market? Why do we as society and why should government support that transition?
It's important because it has to do with the ability we have as a country and as citizens to have a private sector that is competitive, that has the facilities in place, the competence in place to be able to compete with the US, with China. This is a world where one cooperates and competes at the same time. Government's role is not to take over what the private sector is doing. A government's role is to facilitate and change, a very rapid change that in a way is pushed by globalization, by technology. Companies have to decide their business models and what they should do. But in some areas, the benefits to society by making larger investments are so great. And you can have a kind of underinvestment if you leave it to the private sector alone. I'm thinking of education, of research, of innovation in some areas where it's sensible to sort of get the resources together and in a way transform, for example, education into a more digital world, both when it comes to basic education, when it comes to specialists in the digital area. But we know that people with digital competencies will be needed in all kinds of sectors, so that we need more digital competence both in the sort of basic education of everything from lawyers to healthcare workers, but we also need ways of increasing the competence after you've left school and training when you're young, because within a few years you'll need some new competencies on top of that. But even in the areas that public sector has taken a big part of the responsibility, like education, like healthcare, like transportation, we need to cooperate with the private sector. We should be more open and innovative and challenge the private sector to come up with those solutions. And why is that important in the longer run? Well, I think that's a way of making our businesses more competitive on the global scene. Projects don't need to be very complicated. What you need is a government and government agencies that say, yes, if there is a problem, we'll work to remove it. This also should create a massive opportunity for private companies that develop these solutions, because they can then come and say, inside the sort of old way of doing things, it was complicated and very manual. We have this solution that can save a lot of time and money for everyone. The challenge is that technology, the digital solutions are going to solve going forward, are so big and important that we need cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. The challenges the public sector has to solve when it comes to health and welfare and quite public sector dominated areas are too important to be left to the public sector alone. We need the innovation culture, the competition, the drive in the private sector. It's not mainly a way of supporting the private sector. It's a way of supporting the solutions to big societal challenges. And then, of course, you have areas where government is important to, what should we say, facilitate the competitive situation in the private sector. I mean, the most important probably of all is competence. We need skills as a society to have mechanisms that not only puts us high up in the world when it comes to the quality of basic education, but we also need ways of connecting business needs when it comes to upgrading skills with both universities and sort of the traditional learning institutions, but also connecting, what should we say, the new suppliers of knowledge. I mean, what we're seeing now is that different industries are both cooperating with the traditional educational institutions, but also creating their own educational suppliers, because they need to be, in some cases, quite specialized. They need to be very updated when it comes to technology. And that's not only a private sector responsibility. But we've turned more to looking at how should business be helped in their digital transformation. How can government collected data be an asset for some businesses? How can we incentivize sharing of data between companies in the private sector so that they can, by using each other's data, become better, more efficient, create new business models?
What has the Norwegian government been doing specifically to support the digitalization of Norwegian businesses?
Appointed an external committee of people from business to make a report we called Digital 21 with recommendations to government on what we should do. They were both organizational recommendations on how we should organize work in government. There were recommendations on what we should focus on in research and innovation policies. There were recommendations about strategies we should develop and that weren't in place. So we have, for example, made a government strategy on artificial intelligence in Norway a year ago. Who is responsible for the digital in government? And I think one of the challenges we've had in our Nordic countries too is that it's been placed a bit here and there, and it's been a bit on the side of the other things. So one of our challenges has been to, in a way, I think in some other areas you call it mainstreaming, to make not digital at the last chapter. To do that, we've also reorganized government a bit. So we have a Minister of Digitalization. We have a Prime Minister who heads the government's own Digitalization Council, which is a new thing we started. And we've also reorganized our directorates so that it's clearer who has the coordinating responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that the others don't have a responsibility. It'd be problematic if the Minister of digitalization, had the responsibility for all digitalization in the schools, in the transportation sector, in hospitals, and so on. So I think all the other ministers will say that they are also digitalization ministers in their sectors, and that was something the private sector asked for in Digital 21, and that we've been following up now. I'm sometimes asked, what is the one most important thing if you want to succeed with digitalization nationally, and perhaps especially in the government sector? It's leadership or management, and to a certain degree competence when it comes to what possibilities, direction and speed you should go in, because these aren't issues you can sort of give to the IT department and say, we need a technical, I don't really understand this, get some kind of a technical solution. What you will get then is an automation or digitalization or a tool that does what you're doing today, perhaps more efficiently, but probably about the same. And it's only the people right at the top who can have, in a way, the influence, the roles, the budgets, the decision-making capacity to actually make the decisions that are right, to be able to do things in the right speed and in the right sequence. Now, the top people in the different government sectors are never going to be the IT specialists. In order for them not to make the wrong decisions, or ill-informed decisions, you need, of course, an apparatus around them. One thing we've done in Norway is to send top level management in our ministries and biggest agency on in a way IT courses, not to learn programming, but to learn the strategic importance, be able to see some of the opportunities, but also some of the obstacles, listen to experience from people from areas where it has gone wrong, but because everything has, of course, not been perfect when it comes to, for example, big government IT projects. But instead of hiding that, we should bring it to light, make the people who are willing to share their experiences and knowledge into a kind of heroes in this, so that others are able not to make the same mistakes. I think it's extremely important that people talk together across a top level management, and also, of course, political level, to understand each other's experiences and challenges. Then, of course, to use that hopefully increased knowledge. This is for people who are educated, masses of experience from the health sector or education sector. Of course, this is complicated, but government sector and municipalities that are going to succeed in this need to upgrade their skills as everyone else is in society. And when we do that, we're able to do a lot more than we were previously when it comes to changing, to digitizing, to building new services, to reuse information. It's a fantastic time to be part of this, I think.
Eins og fram hefur komið stafræn umbreyting ekki að fara neitt. Og það má vel færa rök fyrir því að valið snúist stafræna umbreytingu eða dauða. Hún komin til að vera og samkeppnishæfni okkar sem þjóðar og þau lífsgæði sem við eigum að venjast velta á því að við séum virkir þáttakendur. Það líka ljóst að þetta ekki áskorun sem við getum mætt öðruvísi en saman. Samstarf og samstaða hefur verið grundvallur þess árangurs sem frændur okkar á Norðurlöndunum hafa náð til þessa. Við hjá SVF höfum svarað ákallinu aðgerðir til að efla og hraða stafrænni framþróun íslenskra fyrirtækja. Við höfum tekið upp höndum saman með VR, HR og fleirum að koma á samstarfsvettvangi á klasaformi til að styðja íslensk fyrirtæki og fólk á vinnumarkaði í stafrænni vegferð með vitundarvakningu og fræðslu og ekki síst með því að efla stafræna hæfni stjórnenda og starfsfólks. Viðræður í gangi við stjórnvöld aðkomu að klasanum. Við hvetjum þig og þitt fyrirtæki til þess að vera með. Ef þú vilt vita meira eða hefur áhuga á að taka þátt í þessu mikilvæga verkefni, skráðu þig á svv.is/uppfærum-Ísland og við munum láta þig vita þegar verkefni verður kynnt frekar. Kærar þakkir fyrir samfylgdina síðustu klukkustundina og við hlökkum til að starfa með ykkur sem allra flestum að þessu mikilvæga verkefni í framtíðinni.